Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, International Intelligence, Strategies for Your International Recruitment Plan. My name's Alicia Rice, and I'm the Digital Marketing Specialist here at Capture Higher Ed. I would now like to introduce Dr. Andy Ray, the Director of International Student Services at Ohio University, and Jack Klett, the Director of Graduate and Online Initiatives at Capture Higher Ed. And now on to you, Jack.
Alicia, thank you. And hello, everybody. Welcome to another Capture Higher Ed webinar. As Alicia mentioned, I am Jack Klett, Director of Graduate and Online Initiatives for Capture Higher Ed. I am especially excited about today's webinar, not only because I have a great co-presenter in Andy Ray, but also because this is my first webinar since returning from NAGAP's annual conference in Toronto. So for those of you in the audience who went, I hope you had as great of a time as I did. I had actually never been to Toronto before, so I was able to stay through the weekend, hop on up to the top of the CN Tower, take the ferry over to Toronto Island Park, and eat a lot. It was a good time. For today, we are talking about international graduate recruitment planning. And in order to do this correctly, we should review where things stand with international enrollment broadly. So let's take a look at the numbers. So what we see here in international enrollment to kind of form the foundation of the discussion today is not all roses. So let me give you an idea of what this picture looks like. In fall 2016, we saw a 3% decline in international enrollment. That was followed by a 7% decline in international enrollment in fall 2017. There are a lot of folks who are debating right now why this is happening. Increased competition abroad is certainly one factor. Another factor that folks are thinking is affecting international enrollment happens to be the way in which the current U.S. political climate is showcased through the global media, the media at large and abroad, which basically comes down to sometimes Washington may not be sending the most welcoming messages to a population outside of the United States. That debate is not for us to take up today, but it is something that is worth following as we continue into the next cycle. To give you an idea in terms of the contribution that international students make as a population to the United States economy, it's $40 billion annually a year, or $40 billion annually, $40 billion each year. And this, of course, makes sense when you factor in the fact that there are 1.1 million international students that are studying here in the United States each year. And while we have seen a decline in international enrollment, as I mentioned, there was increased competition abroad. Universities in Canada, China, New Zealand, Japan, and Spain have all seen gains in their international enrollment. One thing I do want to point out, because depending on how you look at statistics, you can come up with different numbers. I've, of course, cited on this slide where these numbers are from, what reports they're from, what organizations provided them. But one thing to point out, if you take a look at overall enrollment and not new international enrollment, but overall international enrollment, you actually see a slight uptick in last year's international enrollment. That is because a number of students are taking advantage of participating in OPT. Over time, like I said, we will see this decline manifest, the new student decline manifest in lower international enrollment overall. That kind of sets the stage. Let me take us to kind of our purpose for today. So with that as the backdrop, I would like to bring in my co-presenter and special guest, Dr. Andy Ray. Andy, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks, Jack, for having me.
You got it. Andy is the International Director of the Graduate College at Ohio University. He graduated from Middle Tennessee State University with a Bachelor of Science in Audio Engineering and a BA in Spanish. If we take a look at my BA in history and my MA in political science, we are proof, Andy, that people do not go to college to become higher education administrators. Andy also served in the Peace Corps in Costa Rica with his wife, and later obtained an MA and PhD in Spanish from the University of Tennessee. He recently published a book, and out of respect to the Spanish language, Andy, I'm going to let us know the title of your book.
La naturaleza en la literatura costarricense, un enfoque ecocultural. So basically, nature in Costa Rican literature from an eco-cultural focus. Perfect.
Certainly a far better job than I would have done. So thanks for the save. Andy enjoys, while we probably won't get to this today, Andy does enjoy discussions on ethnomusicology, playing percussion, spending time with his wife, his kids, and being outdoors. Andy, is it okay if I share with the audience kind of how you came to join me today?
Yeah, absolutely.
So when I attend NAGAP conferences, I've been a long-time member, like many in the audience, of NAGAP, the Association for Graduate Enrollment Management. I've served in the graduate enrollment space, in the graduate program development space for over 20 years on the institution side before moving on to Capture. But I've retained my NAGAP membership because I like to attend sessions like any other member and find out what new fun things are going on and what my colleagues are doing. Your session, you presented at NAGAP, so that piqued my interest. And I, of course, attended. And I'm sitting there the entire time knowing that I was planning on covering this topic in a Capture webinar. I'd already done the video promo and everything for the webinar. And for every webinar that I do for Capture, I'm always keen on the idea of making sure that folks are able to walk away from their time with us and have something to implement, right? Have something to show for that time. And the entire time that I was in your presentation, I thought this is perfect because the way you laid things out was perfect in terms of giving people, I think, a really nice action plan on what they can do. And then, of course, I talked you up and you said, absolutely, I'll do this. So thanks again. Thanks again for joining me.
No problem.
I want to talk just quickly about the goal of this session. This really is to give audience members, to give all of you attending, the ability to walk away with a framework or a wireframe that guides you through the creation or the revision, the implementation of an international recruitment plan, and really a bit of a best practice guide on how to view your international student population and how to move forward with kind of best practices in terms of recruitment. Now, having attended your session at NAGAP, Andy, as I mentioned, I was really happy to see how you framed this topic, how you presented it. I found the action steps that you provided to be, frankly, smart. They were effective, super helpful, especially for those who might be looking at taking a deeper look at their international recruitment strategy. So with that in mind, I'm going to kind of shut my mouth here for a little bit. Andy, why don't you take us through kind of your thoughts and recommendations on this topic? And by all means, if I am not advancing a slide quickly enough, just let me know.
Okay, that sounds great, Jack. Thanks so much.
You got it.
So welcome, everybody. And thanks to Jack and Capture for inviting me on this presentation. As Jack said, I'm Andy Ray. I'm over at the Ohio University. And the presentation, the way I've thought about, and I've spent a lot of time thinking about international recruitment. Honestly, I think it's kind of fun. But one of the things that I noticed was, how do we think about international recruitment when we're charged with this task? And I think the natural thing to do is think outwardly, right? So if someone says, okay, you're in charge of recruiting international students, in this case, let's say international graduate students, here's a budget, maybe here's not a budget, go. What do you do? And I think the natural inclination is to think outwardly, meaning, okay, where am I going to go? Where do I need to be? What fare or what travel plans do I need to do? And after thinking about this for a long time and making plenty of mistakes, I've come to the conclusion that thinking inwardly is the first step. So how do you think inwardly? Well, I think that's by asking questions. So asking the right kind of questions, in my mind, is really the first step. And that'll kind of guide an internal process in which you can then start thinking externally about how to actually do the recruitment. So moving, if you don't mind, Jack, to the next slide. Thank you. Then we can come to the point of, well, what questions should I ask? And this really kind of can depend on your institution, but I've kind of set out certain kind of framework of questions that hopefully will help you get going, and then you can modify them. You can change the order of them. They're not really in a particular order at this moment. They're just good kind of foundation questions, because ultimately what you're doing is constructing your edifice of international recruitment, and you do want to have a solid foundation. Because if you don't have a solid foundation, when you go back looking at those trends that Jack presented, then you're not going to be prepared for those kind of things. And the reality is, it's hard to predict a lot of those kind of changes. International recruitment is constantly changing. So having a strong foundation, it's not allowing you to predict the changes, even though you can a little bit with certain data analysis. Rather, it's allowing you to be adaptable for those changes. So instead of trying to manipulate the road, you're manipulating your own suspension for the road that constantly changes. Okay, so some of those questions. Well, one that I think is really important is find out about your institution specifically. This is where some of the most important data is housed. You've already got it. It's a matter of looking for it. So how do I find out about it? Well, who is currently attending your university? You can find this information out through a plethora of means, and we'll talk about each one of these questions a little bit more in detail. Okay, who's interested in attending your university? Okay, so yes, we'll go right on to the.
You want to go right on, or did I advance too quickly?
Well, I'll philosophize on each one of these for just a second, and then we'll move on to each page. Sorry about that, Jack. I'm throwing him a curveball, everybody. So who's interested in my institution? I mean, this is a really important question to ask, even before you begin to think outwardly about recruitment. Why are they interested in studying at your institution? This is another really key component. And as obvious as it may seem, time and time again, I've seen people that are charging ahead. They've got their plane ticket, they're ready to go, they've signed on board for a fair or an event, and they're just ready to go on out. And they have no idea who's currently attending or why those students are at their university. So those key talking points really need to be at the front and center stage before you even decide to do any kind of traveling. Where are they currently located? You know, obviously before they come to your institution, these applicants. So one is to talk about potential students that have never even heard of your institution. Two, it's important to think about those students that have applied to your institution, because those students may not end up coming to your institution, which is something that you need to look into as well. But trying to kind of look at these students that have picked between, 5 and 8 universities to study, and figure out why was your institution on that list. And then later on, you can start investigating why you were chosen or why you weren't chosen. And last but not least, how did they even get you on that list of 5 to 8 universities that they applied to? Okay, so going to that first question, who's currently studying at my institution? Well, one thing is to ask the question. Another thing is then to know what tools are available to you. This one is not as easy, the tools part, as it may sound, especially if you're new to international recruitment, if you're new to the university in which you're working, or if the university itself is new to international recruitment. The idea of, okay, what do I have at my disposal, is one that can be a little difficult to grasp at times. And so one thing to think about, especially if you're a public institution, is your institutional research office. And many times you can reach out directly to them, or you can simply go on to your own university's website and start digging around a little bit. As you do this, one thing that's really important to keep in mind, and many people don't think about this. I didn't think about this until I was at a different university, and the director of the International Student Services Office pointed this out to me and said, "What do you mean?" And what he was asking me was, when I was talking about the word international, what does international mean? Be prepared to define that word, and also be prepared to understand other definitions of that word, even at your same institution. You'll quickly find, once you start thinking at it from this lens, that your own university has multiple definitions or varying definitions of international. So be prepared to explain what you mean when you say international, and be prepared to accept the fact that other offices and departments don't see it the same way. So when you're looking at the Institutional Research's webpage, when they're talking about international, how are they defining that? Is that by the country where the student was born, the visa type, country of citizenship, country perhaps where the student attended undergraduate studies? I doubt it's going to be that, but it's important to also ask that question. And as you start to look at the different ways that are guiding you for gathering resources and information and data, keep those variants in mind around that term international. Your International Student Services Office, as I just mentioned, I was having a conversation with the director of an International Student Services office, and he was the one that even kind of gave me that aha moment on redefining or understanding what international means in the first place. They're going to have wonderful amounts of information. So definitely buddy up with them, gather information from them, and also offer to help them in ways that you can if they need it. The more you help and are seen as a helpful department on campus, the more other departments and offices are going to be willing to help you when you need that information, and you will need that information. Admissions offices are another key resource. Sometimes universities, and you may chuckle to yourself, can be protective of data, or you feel like your university is siloed, there are different departments and they don't communicate effectively. Be that change. Even no matter what position you hold in your office, be the change to build bridges in your own university and to collaborate more. And eventually, it may not happen overnight. You will see the fruits of that labor, and you'll be able to gather more data and get insight on certain trends that maybe the office in general doesn't want to share with other departments. So another way to find out, a survey. Surveys are great. The key to the survey, in my opinion, is keep them short. Oftentimes, I'll see these surveys that are so long, and my eyes start glazing over. I know if my eyes are glazing over on a survey or an email, it's too long, and it's going to be really too long for someone whose language, their first language, is not English. Take advantage of this during the international orientation. You've already got the students there. You want to work into their flow, and I'll talk about flow here shortly. But you don't want to make a long survey that's going to be out of the way, because you'll either not get answers or you'll get corrupt data. After a while, students may get bored. They just start clicking it on through because they want that $5 coffee gift card that you've offered at the end, or whatever it happens to be, or they just want to be done with it. So keep it short and sweet. And last but not least, talk with your students. They're going to offer you so much helpful insight because they're giving you that on-the-ground perspective. One of the best examples I can think of this is a challenge that I think a lot of universities have, where students are filling out a certain amount of money on their I-20. They've gotten enough people back home to support them with the bank account to show they have enough money for a year for graduate study. They're not going to get an assistantship, or it's only a partial assistantship. And so their mentality is, the student that is as long as I get there, I can figure out the next step. Whereas in reality, we know that's not true at all. It's really more kind of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where you've got to get that kind of base survival before you can start getting the things higher up in that triangle, such as good grades. So understanding the worries or assumptions that a lot of students have by chatting with them will give you a lot more information about what you can do for international recruitment. I talked a lot about that, so I'll try to be a little bit quicker for everybody. I know it's 2 o'clock on a Wednesday afternoon, so I'll try not to put you to sleep.
I'm at the edge of my seat, Andy. I'm sure everybody else is.
Thank you, Jack. So who's interested in my institution? This is a really valid question to ask, and it should not be taken for granted. Another thing that's super interesting that I really like doing is I take that IIE Open Doors report. If you go back from what Jack was talking about earlier, he made a reference to that about certain trends on student mobility in the United States particularly. Find out what are the top countries coming to the United States. Does that match your list? Why not? I don't even think I mentioned that on this slide, but it's interesting to find out who's coming to your institution, who's interested in your institution. That'll really, really guide where you need to be going and focusing your energy. So analytics on your website, this one is key. It's also free in terms of money. Obviously, you have time to spend, which you have to think of, money is time. But Google Analytics, get that on your website and start playing around with it. You can generate some really nice reports quickly, and you can find out some very interesting things about your website. So going back to the IIE Open Doors report, okay, you're seeing students from one particular country pinging your website. They're looking a lot, and that country is not on IIE Open Doors top 10, let's say, list of sending countries to the United States. Why? You know, why is your institution being looked at so much? What's the interest? And maybe that might be an area that you might want to look at for recruitment purposes, because it could be a kind of a niche market that other universities aren't looking at. So even though maybe not everybody's looking at, I don't know where it might be, Kazakhstan, but you've got a lot of students from that area, or people, assuming they're students, looking at your university. Hey, you might want to start looking at scholarship initiatives. You might want to go to Washington, D.C. and connect with their consulate or their embassy, and really start looking at that from a different angle. And before you know it, you might have some long standing ties and connections that other universities simply don't have. Again, your admissions office, who's been applying? Again, these may not be enrolled students, but who's actually applied? There's a difference there. And one strategy I have had for a long time is recruit your applicants. So instead of trying to blindly shotgun, I'm going to go on all these tours and go all around the world. Instead, I'm going to really pay attention to those students who have applied and did not come to my university. Maybe that's where I need to be heading. And then again, as you've seen from what I mentioned on the previous slide, chat with your current students. What's the interest? Who might be interested? Why might they be interested? So another question to ask: why are applicants or students interested in studying my institution? Again, it seems like something that could be easy. You could chalk it up to your STEM program is just amazing, or if you got some laboratory, but it may be something that's not even on your radar at all. And it may not be academically related. It could be there's a strong population of this community in the city that's next to where your university is. It could be something else altogether. It could be a high reputation for safety in your community. You don't know. You may have an idea, or maybe you do know to a certain degree, but asking and really trying to find out the answer to that question from a plurality of sub-questions will give you such a better idea and really help you kind of place your recruitment strategy. So some of those ways to find out, again, you'll see repetition here, but that's because these strategies are meant to save time and save energy. So what can you get out of the survey? Well, you can find out why students already decided to study at your university. You can find out problems, advantages, and you can find out why they might be interested in studying at your university. So these would be incoming students that you would be asking. So it is a select population. So be cognizant of that. But it's also a very valuable tool. So again, admissions offices. You really, I can't stress that enough, trying to build bridges with your admissions offices if you're not in an admissions office. Are you noticing certain trends? What about word of mouth? How have you noticed that affect the kind of trends that you're seeing internally in your office? And as I mentioned before, are there any communities that exist in your region, your city, neighboring cities that might be affecting certain student populations at your university? So students aren't always going to buy into that idea of the glossy presentation that your recruiters are showing them. I've seen so many different times where a flashy recruiter comes into a classroom, begins talking to students, and the students' eyes just gloss over because they're seeing this time and time again. And the reason that their eyes are kind of glossing over, it's because the pictures are awesome. You know, everybody's got this amazing older set of buildings and beautiful green lawns, and it's lush, and there's also cities nearby, and students are always smiling and happy. But the information that the recruiters are actually telling the students is the same product, and they're kind of used to it. So how can recruiters specify and really kind of help the students out a little bit more? Well, these questions will help that out if you start asking them from that angle, especially if you're the recruiter. Alumni are great resources. They're tricky because I guarantee that your alumni office will not have a whole bunch of information on international alums. If they do, kudos to them. Buddy up with them immediately. But I would imagine that the majority of your universities do not have a strong international alumni community built, particularly through your alumni office. It's just a reality. It's because I think a lot of this was founded prior to that awareness, and it's kind of been edified into the thought process. And this is the time to rethink these kinds of initiatives. So putting that international, that word international, into that dialogue, whether it's you or whether it's your supervisor or your supervisor's supervisor, getting that onto the table, getting people's ears used to it, not only in terms of money, but also in terms of what does it mean, is a great way to begin reaching out. Okay, again, chat with your current students. You've got to find out this information. If you chat with your current students, that will help you when you talk to future students.
Can I just mention something about that? So there is obviously a theme here. The last three guiding questions you've mentioned specifically chatting with your current students, and I'm just curious from your own experience. Are you finding that folks at institutions simply aren't having these discussions, or at least having enough discussions with their current international student population?
Well, that's a great question, Jack. In terms of what other institutions are doing of not asking enough questions, I'm not sure, but I know that how much I have gained by talking with students and asking them questions finding out, for example, what day of the week I was born on, so then I can start talking to a lot of my students from West Africa, or finding out what my Chinese zodiac sign is. Simple conversations build trust. They allow you to ask questions. They allow you to help the students feel more comfortable. And ultimately, the goal is not necessarily to pull information from the students, but it's to build bridges. And you've got to, before you can start crossing these gaps, you've got to have a bridge in place. So talking with your students really helps you establish that bridge and that element. And once they feel comfortable, then they'll start telling you things that you didn't even realize, So you have to know that you don't know. And ways to improve from that point is by talking to your students.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And kind of dovetailing with that, I tell folks all the time, because there are many people who are in charge of international recruitment, but they're also in charge of recruiting for other populations too. No matter what meeting you attend, no matter what the topic is, if it's not about international students or international recruitment specifically, that's fine. But at some point during the course of that meeting, think about this international student population and think about how to bring them into the conversation and into the discussion. So, all right, let's move on to the next question.
All right, so where are they currently located? This is one of the more exciting parts for international recruitment, especially, again, the analytics on your website, finding out where people are coming from as they are looking on your web page. Now, when I say your web page, I'm not talking necessarily about the university's main web page. That should be taken with a grain of salt, because it's, number one, it's trying to answer too many questions. I have yet to see an effective university's main landing web page, and I don't know if I ever will, because it's too broad. And it's just by nature, it's trying to answer too many questions, and it just can't. So I really would recommend looking at your departmental or your main office's website and start looking at analytics from that side of stuff. Or if you have access to the admissions websites, like undergraduate and graduate admissions websites, that data is really going to prove helpful. And it's really interesting to see where those students are coming from. Does that match up with the applications? Does that match up with the students that are enrolled at your university? Does that whole thread flow through, or are there variants? And why is that happening? Is that because of immigration challenges, as Jack mentioned earlier, or is it for some other reason? Again, the admissions offices I mentioned, they'll have a lot of really good information if you can pull that data and find out trends. And so it's not, the kind of, I think the assumption at times can be to look at trends of enrolled students. But looking at trends of applicants is also just incredibly interesting and revealing to where you might want to start recruiting.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, Andy, especially because if you take a look at the application population, that is going to look differently compared to the enrolled student population. So you're right. That's going to give you, it's going to prompt some additional questions for you to ask, and I think give you some really good information as to what is it that you can do with that population of students who are actually not getting to that next stage in the funnel. And I would even maybe add to that and say it might even be a good idea to take a look at all of those folks who have inquired about your institution from abroad, but who have not necessarily taken that action to apply. That's another group that you can look at and try to find these answers and these trends.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if these students are applying to a certain amount of universities, they're already showing some type of interest in your university. If they're not coming, finding out why not in one form or another is incredibly helpful. Okay, so how do they actually find out about your institution in the first place? This one's trickier because you're only going to be able to really poll the students that finally decided to come to your university, not those ones that we were just talking about that applied but didn't end up enrolling for one reason or another. So that survey is really going to be able to help you out on answering the question why. Admissions offices, is that question on your application, whether it's undergrad, graduate, your English Language Institute? Do you have a question on your application itself to find out how they found out about your university? Remember, trying to get these questions, trying to get this data from students can be challenging, so you want to integrate it into their flow. Their flow is they're already going to fill out the application. Why not add that one question into that application? Or if they're already on campus and you decided you wanted to do a survey during International Student Orientation, add that extra question. So you have a total of 6 questions, for example. And then last but not least, as Jack highlighted, the chat with your current students strategy is really well worth your time. And they're going to feel happier because you've reached out to talk with them. That's a win-win. So now that you've asked those questions and you've been gaining this data, what do you do with it and how do you implement it? One strategy, even prior to that, is when people reach out to you and give you a phone call or send you an email and say, hey, do you have a minute to chat? I want to talk to you about this platform or something I've got to offer. Yeah, I almost always have time to chat. Why? Because conversation, I learn from conversation. That's just who I am. But there's always going to be some piece of information that I'm not thinking about from a certain angle, and I can gain that extra perspective. Plus, I can gain knowledge, and I could work with that company. But one of the things that I've noticed, just kind of an anecdotal trend, is that I get asked a lot, okay, do you want to improve your recruitment? And a lot of times, the answer would be yes. Okay, do you not have enough money? Correct. No, I do not. Okay, well, here's what we're thinking about to help you do what you need to do when you don't have enough money. That's a really good idea. How could I take that idea and appropriate it? How could I put it into my own institutional strategy for international recruitment? And that answer is going to vary. But one example that I put up here is talking about a platform intended to improve communication. The challenge with this a lot of times is it's not only budgetary, but let's say you have enough money to purchase a platform. Is that platform going to flow into your needs, your daily activities? How can that flow? And if you don't feel that it can, or if you're not able to adapt to it, can you adapt to the next question? Can I do my own homegrown version of this platform by piecing together some different communication platforms that are out there, mostly for free? If the answer is no to any and all of the above, then the reality is you probably shouldn't be thinking about international recruitment. It does take time. Or if you've been tasked with this goal and this initiative, you need to make sure you're also not only given enough money, and maybe you won't be, but you got to be given enough time. Time is really a crucial element to international recruitment. So what you can do is set up with time as one of the key elements here is either you can sign on with a company and work with their platform. That still requires some time to answer questions, but they're pulling in students and funneling them right to your institution with certain questions that you'll know how to answer. Answer them quickly. Or the other option is to look at WhatsApp, Naver. You can get on to WeChat. Even when I give presentations, when I used to really give them often in China, I would have my WeChat QR code, WeChat or WeChat, the communication platform for cell phones that's most often used in China. I would hold it out, and sometimes I would pass it around to students as I was talking, and they could hold their cell phone up to it and scan my phone data, and then they could send me messages and ask me questions. It was really helpful. It seems overwhelming and you feel like you're going to get a million questions and not be able to answer and it's going to take up all your time. What I really found was I would get a steady flow of a few questions here and there. And it was easier for me to answer on my cell phone really quickly than it was for me to try to sit down and dedicate a certain amount of time all the time to do it. So I even wrote on there, dedicate 45 minutes a day to it. Honestly, what I ended up doing was I would answer the question as it came to me, and I'd answer it quickly on my cell phone, and I was done. So yeah, I was comfortable using my cell phone to answer university questions. It worked out really well, though.
Yeah, this is really solid advice about having these conversations, talking to companies when they call you. In fact, Andy, I think I can hear the Capture sales team cheering your name on right now, saying, yes, go Andy. But I think it's important because any company that I personally, the way I feel, someone who works for Capture Higher Ed, any company worth their salt is a company that is in this to advance enrollment management, to be able to provide our colleagues with really smart ways to do the important work that they're doing at institutions. So I know when I have these conversations with GEM professionals across the country, I'm happy to have these conversations. And again, I'm not in sales, but I'm happy to have the conversations because for me, these conversations about your specific challenges at your specific institution provide me with market research. But at the same time, I'm able to turn to you and say, well, here are all the wonderful things you can do if you were to partner with Capture, but here are just some really good best practices that you might not be using right now. And if you are using them, great, that's wonderful. But if not, you just got that information for free, and hopefully you're able to do something about it and do something with it. I do want to, you mentioned agents here kind of loosely, maybe in a bit of a different context, but I did want to deal with this one issue kind of head on. When I was seated at Thomas Jefferson University, I worked with international recruiting agents. And I'm just curious as to kind of what your experience has been with international recruitment assistance in the form of these agencies. I know when you and I were chatting, you mentioned your involvement with ERC. Can you maybe talk a little bit about what ERC is and kind of your feeling on international recruiting agents?
Sure. And I am not necessarily speaking on behalf of Ohio University in this context, rather as an
Sure.
educational professional. So my experience with international recruitment agents most often was with another university, and it's like a lot of recruitment challenges. It kind of depends on how you partner and the expectations of you as a university and also of the partner and the partner's expectations as well of themselves and of you. And when I tried to clarify those expectations, I found much better success. It is the business of education, so I think that's important to keep front and center, understanding what that means and how that impacts students first and foremost, universities, and also the agencies themselves. AIRC is the American International Recruitment Council. It's evolved over time, and I think it's going to continue to evolve. But it started out as kind of an organization to ensure the efficacy and ethics of international recruitment agents. And like everything else, it's got its pluses and minuses. I've really enjoyed working with them. I enjoyed working with them in the past. Currently, I don't do much of AIRC related tasks. That's just due to my different position. But anytime I see anyone from AIRC, it's always a pleasure to see them. But yeah, with agents, I noticed the difference that I noticed was when I was speaking to an agent, they wanted to know, especially their team, if I was giving like a training. By the way, give training often. be clear about what you expect. Show gratitude to the fact that most of these agents are speaking to you in a second or third language, and you haven't learned, or you've learned little of their language. I've always tried to show my gratitude for that, and I think they've been grateful for me, my awareness of that. But is the difference is that they want to know, okay, how can I do what I need to do better and more efficiently? Whereas if you're speaking with educators or high school counselors for that matter, or professors, it's going to be more of a curricular nature in what they're interested in talking about, not to overgeneralize by any means. So you got to cater to that conversation and keep that in mind.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the
and we could have we actually could have an entire conversation specifically on kind of best practices in dealing with and working with agents. From my own experience, I really struggled with the number of agents that we were working with, and there were just quite a lot of different agreements with different agencies. And there are ways, there are organizations that are willing to kind of step in and basically serve as a bit of an umbrella to manage the agent network that's working with you. Capture is not one of those, but I just want to let folks know that those organizations do exist and can really save a lot of time and actually improve the relationship between the agents themselves and the institution. And it might be worth exploring. So, all right, let's move on.
Yeah, speaking of saving time, I'll try to go through quickly some of these elements. So one of the most important things that I've found is the concept of flow, and this applies to everybody, and that's why it's so important. It applies to the student, it applies to you, it applies to the different offices that you have to work with. So one, I try to incorporate things into my flow because it's more realistic that I'll actually get it done instead of promising someone, oh yeah, sure, I'll get that done, and then I forget about it because it's not my normal flow of doing things. The other thing is to keep in mind that students have their flows. So am I asking them to do stuff that's going to constantly step outside of their flow? Now, that said, I do not cater to students saying, hey, I just need this and this and this. I will say, I've created a special website with all my international requirements for the application. You need to review that first and then come back with specific questions, because if you want to be a graduate student, you need to have a graduate application. So I don't mind being the tough educator, but I also know that I need to answer them in a way that matches their flow, or ask them to do things that will also match their flow. This, in terms of recruitment, means use what you already have. Instead of trying to promise or pretend that you're going to do something completely new, such as that exercise machine or that New Year's resolution that you did that lasted for about 2 months, use what you already have and turn that into a recruitment tool. So what we talked about, I'm looking at this one on the right, the circle on the right. It says, for an example, if you are in an admissions office, use data of past applicants to create a report. You've already got this data. You're not doing anything differently because you've already collected it. It was already part of your admissions flow in the first place. That data can really help drive where and how you need to recruit. So if you're noticing students from a certain university, I found when I started looking up certain universities, I found that we had alumni in the registrar's office at those universities around the world. So that's something that didn't really go out of my flow at all. I was already trying to verify the credential. I needed to reach out to the registrar's office anyway. I was already pulling data from my own institution. Do you notice any trends as you're looking at this data? If you see that, reach out. I mean, an email can go a long way. Sometimes it'll get forgotten. But a lot of times, if you're looking and you're excited and you say, hey, we've noticed that you are an alumnus of our university. Number one, we'd like to send you a mug or a thank you gift. 2, could you review this credential evaluation? 3, do you know why your students are so interested, or have you been talking to your students? Would you like a visit from us? bam, all of a sudden you've got a specialized catered tour to that country or to that specific city with a representative of the university. So that's a really good way to use your flow to help you recruit. And one thing that you want to remember is whenever you're out recruiting, you are helping them. Even if you attend a fair, you're helping the organizers of the fair by being another university from the United States to help them attract students. So it's not that you need to be mean or, hey, be glad I'm even here kind of attitude, but let them know, because sometimes it's not even in their mindset that you're actually helping them. And you can do certain strategies to let them know, hey, I'm here to help you. That's why I'm doing this. And later on, you're kind of sowing some seeds that will help you out for recruitment as well. Okay, we can move next, Jack, just to keep things moving. Okay, so the website, as I mentioned, the main website is going to be impossible to really capture everything you need. It's going to be tricky when you're trying to use data from that main website. It could be easily corrupt because you just don't know who and why and what age level, what if it's an undergraduate that they're looking for that kind of studies. So really focus on your office or your department's website. Keep this clean. Keep it intuitive. Remember that a lot of people will not be speaking English as a native language. As a matter of fact, the speed that I'm speaking right now could be a challenge for a lot of your potential students. So even as you're talking to students, you want to, what I always call kind of it's slower than a jog, faster than a walk, speed of speaking English. It's quite uncomfortable. I'm beginning to do it right now. I'm speaking a little bit slower, but not overly slow so that I come off sounding patronizing. It's an important communicative strategy. If you don't have a whole bunch of control for your website, can you, on your website, or if it's another website that you'd love to be able to have access to, but you don't, can you help direct students by putting hyperlinks onto your website? So just getting students in the right direction is helpful. Okay, so other tactics that don't cost much, mostly time. Education USA is a wonderful resource. You're the expert. Remember that. A lot of times students are looking to you to help them unveil the mysteries of the application process, of what it's like to study, what it's like to live in this country. If you've grown up in the United States, you are an expert at living in the United States. Don't take that knowledge for granted. Share it. Another thing is I like to think of us as the University Wizards of Oz. You know, we're behind that curtain doing all these controls, and we kind of forget about that. But as we're, staring at our computer screen, we're doing the same thing the Wizard of Oz did. We're creating the magic so that students can actually get here and study, which is awesome. So with that, what happens on the other side of the application process? Another U.S. Organization that you can team up with is U.S. Commercial Services. They're a little bit different, actually vastly different from Education USA. They'll offer tours, and they can organize, they can get a hotel, and they can get students to come to that hotel dining hall, and you can give a presentation. It will come at a cost. I think they have a golden key is what their one of their marketing strategy is, but that's another thing to look at. Okay, so recruit your applicants. We've discussed that. Make your application clean. Please go back, read your application again, even have an international student or two look at it with you and point out things that don't make sense. Get away from those prepositions. If you're having someone to reach out, that doesn't make any sense. Contact, connect, use those kind of words, okay? It may sound simple, but please be aware that English is a strange language. It's hard to understand. All those prepositions get people really tangled up quickly. If there's a mistake, apologize and fix it. The students aren't seeing your department. They're seeing the university as a whole. Just fix it as quickly as possible and move on. On that note, don't leave people hanging. It's so much better to answer a question with, I don't have an answer for you yet, but I will find one soon, versus not answering until you actually get the answer. It's the worst thing ever. Just imagine you're at the doctor's office and they're like, well, we're going to give a screen to make sure you don't have cancer. And they don't give you an answer. It's much better to say, hey, the test results haven't come in yet. We'll let you know as soon as they do. Same thing for applying to a university in another country. You want to know something. So give them something, even if it's nothing. That goes back to the point of recruitment is psychological. So keep that in mind as you're doing a lot of this.
Recruitment is psychological. I love that. And I love the connection about website. As it relates to recruitment is psychological, I think that's something that Capture certainly buys into. Andy, it's in fact, I just had a webinar, I think a month or so ago, talking about how relationships matter and the ways in which counselor interaction with prospective students can really improve, can make that connection in such a way that the likelihood of that individual both applying and enrolling to the institution is much higher. Andy talked a lot in his portion of this presentation about the website, about Google Analytics, about everything that you can learn about who is accessing your site. Capture takes that a bit, kind of one step forward with something that we refer to as Capture Behavioral Engagement. This is the software that powers what we refer to as behavioral intelligence. So just like you have Google Analytics code, right, a string of code that you place on your site for Google Analytics, we have a string of code at Capture that is placed on the site, and that powers behavioral intelligence and Capture Behavioral Engagement. What you see here on your screen is just a quick example of what CBE can do in the international space. There's far more than this, but this just gives you a sample. This is the University of Toledo's website. This was a campaign that we had done for them specifically for students accessing their website from abroad. So anyone accessing from a personal display device or an IP address that was outside the United States would receive certain specific messaging. In this particular case, there was a campaign launched for a specific country. So it was a specific country of interest that University of Toledo was focusing on. So you can see here that the top right corner, this is a little piece of dynamic content known as a toaster. So it pops up on the screen just like a toaster would and says, outside the United States, ? And then from there, you see in the lower right, there is a student from that specific country who's studying at Toledo talking about their international experience at the University of Toledo and the fact that in this particular case, University of Toledo is both a welcoming and cohesive campus for individuals from that specific country and for international students as a whole. There are many other things that Capture Behavioral Engagement powers for you. We're not going to get into all of them right now because many of you have joined us for prior webinars where we've talked about all this. And those of you that are new, that is great because every time we do one of these sessions, I want to make it clear, as Andy kind of alluded to when he said talk with folks from companies. I conduct graduate recruitment assessments every day. I'm talking with my fellow graduate enrollment practitioners, talking specifically about their unique challenges. This is a benefit to me. It helps me with my own market research to determine how to create solutions that address these challenges. But it also allows me to put together some best practices and a solution set for you and your specific challenges at your institution. So as a follow-up to this webinar, when you get the recording, you will also have an opportunity to go ahead and schedule a conversation with me. I am leaving us very little time for questions, but I'm going to go ahead and see if we can get one before the end of our time.
All right, thank you, Jack. Let's see, we do have a couple questions. We have a lot of love for your NAGAP blog. We had a couple comments on that. So
thank you.
I'll pick out one of the questions and then I'll leave the rest of them for a follow-up. Okay, so I see it says, for a university that is new to international recruitment, what is the first step to take in starting this whole recruitment strategy?
Andy, I'm going to leave that to you to answer.
Sure. So I came from a university that was fairly new in international recruitment, and one of the first things I did was I did get like a general kind of training session on, I think it was a NAFSA armchair recruitment training session, just to give me a general idea of some things. If you don't have funding for that and you're really beginning to look at international recruitment, I think asking those 5 or 6 questions, find out first and foremost, before you look outward, look inward. Hopefully that's not too vague.
No,
That's a
I
good
think
one.
that's it. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a great place to start. Alicia, should we close it down? I'm imagining we should. We're past time.
We certainly.
But before I go with my portion, I'll leave it to you to shut things down. But before I go, Andy, thank you so much for joining us. I loved the conversation, and I know the folks who attended and folks who are going to get this recording and share it will get a lot out of it. So thank you so much for taking the time.
Yes, no problem, Jack. It's great doing this. Thank you all.
Got it. Alicia, close us down.
All right. Thank you, Jack, and thank you everyone for attending today's webinar, International Intelligence, Strategies for Your International Recruitment Plan.